I was 17 when my world quietly folded in on itself. But the truth is, it had been weakening for years, thinning like old paper until one moment finally tore it open. People think childhood damage sounds loud, like yelling, slamming doors, or dramatic scenes straight out of a movie. But in my house, damage was quiet. It was in glances, choices, and all the words my father never said to me. And, crucially, the ones he said too easily. My twin brother Luke and I were born 2 minutes apart. Same day, same room, same chaotic rush of nurses and flashing monitors. Mom used to joke that we even cried in harmony, but as we got older, our lives became anything but harmonious. Luke was Dad's pride. Tall, confident, athletic, the kind of son fathers brag about to coworkers and neighbors. I wasn't jealous of him as a person. I was jealous of what he received without even asking. Time, attention, and belief. Those were things I collected in fragments, only when my grandmother, Dad's mother, was around. She loved me quietly but fiercely, like she could see something in me everyone else refused to look at long enough to notice. But she passed away when we were 11, and with her, the last person who made me feel truly seen disappeared. After that, it was just Dad, deciding every year more boldly who mattered and who didn't. And the older we got, the clearer his decision became. The morning Dad told us to come into the living room, I expected nothing special. Maybe something for Luke again. Some new trip, a workshop, a summer program. Dad always found something to praise or reward him for. I walked in with my hair still slightly damp from a rushed shower. Luke was already lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Dad stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, wearing that familiar, tight expression that meant he was preparing to announce something major. "Hannah," Dad said without looking at me. "Sit down." It wasn't a request, it wasn't a gentle call. It was just a command. I sat on the far end of the love seat, watching as Dad turned to Luke with that bright, proud smile, the one I never seemed to deserve. "I talked to the bank this week," Dad announced, "and I've made a decision." Luke lifted his eyebrows. "About what?" "The savings account your grandmother opened." My breath hitched. Her account. The one she always told me was meant for both of us. The one Dad never talked about. Dad continued, "I've decided to transfer the entire balance to Luke's control. He's shown real ambition and he'll need it for his future." My pulse stopped, then exploded with a sickening rush. "What?" I whispered before I could stop myself. Dad glanced at me with open annoyance. "You don't need it, Hannah. You haven't demonstrated the same drive your brother has. Luke has goals. You're still figuring yourself out." The statement landed like a slap. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to hurt me with malice. He was simply stating what he believed to be a fact, which somehow made it worse. Luke sat up quickly. "Dad, wait." Dad held up a hand, silencing him. "Luke, don't argue. You're the one who will put that money to good use. It's the smart choice." Then he looked straight at me, his gaze cold and dismissive. "Hannah, you're not ready for responsibility like that. You're not good enough yet to manage something so important." There it was, the quiet cruelty. Smooth, effortless, practiced. My lungs tightened. Grandma wanted it for both of us. "Your grandmother didn't know how things would turn out," Dad said sharply, his voice rising in impatience. "She didn't know who would actually make something of themselves." My eyes burned with unshed tears. Luke stared at him, genuinely shocked. "Dad, that's not fair." "It's reality," Dad replied, annoyed by the interruption. "I'm doing what's best for the money. For the family. For the family." Except I wasn't part of that definition. I felt my throat closing, but I forced myself to stay still. Crying in front of him had never changed anything, only given him more reason to dismiss me. Mom had been standing silently near the hallway, a dish towel twisted between her fingers. Her face looked pale, tight, like someone bracing for impact. But she didn't speak. Dad had that effect on her too, a silencing power rooted in years of control. I stood up slowly. "I'm going to my room." Dad didn't stop me. He didn't care enough to. He only said, "Don't make this dramatic, Hannah. This is a practical decision. Luke has potential." As if I didn't. As if I never had. I walked upstairs, nausea curling in my stomach, my hands trembling. Not good enough. Not worth trusting. Not deserving of what my own grandmother saved for me. I sat on my bed, hugging my knees, trying not to let the hurt swallow me whole. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Hannah?" Mom's voice was a weak tremor. "Come in," I croaked. She slipped inside and shut the door behind her, her face full of the raw sadness she never dared to show in front of Dad. She sat beside me and wrapped her arms around me, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I tried to stop him. He wouldn't listen." "Why?" I whispered into her shoulder. "Why am I never enough?" "You are," she said fiercely. "You're more than enough. Your father just refuses to see anyone who doesn't reflect what he values." I pressed my forehead against her shoulder. "It was Grandma's money," I whispered. "She wanted it for us." Mom swallowed hard. I felt her chest rise and fall too fast. "That's what your father told you," she said quietly. "But it's not the whole truth." I pulled back slightly, confusion replacing the despair. "What do you mean?" Mom reached into her cardigan pocket. Her fingers trembled. And when she pulled out a yellowed folder, old, peeling at the edges, with the bank's stamp faintly visible, my stomach dropped entirely. "What's that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She looked into my eyes with a mixture of guilt and grim determination. "Your grandmother left something behind," she said. "Something your father never wanted you to see." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Mom placed the folder gently in my hands. "This belongs to you, Hannah, and it's time you know the truth." My heart pounded. I opened the folder, and the first page made my entire world snap in half. The first document was a bank statement from nearly 10 years ago, before Grandma passed away. My name was printed at the top, next to Luke's. Joint account holders, just like Grandma always told us. My fingers tightened around the paper. The balance back then was growing steadily. Small deposits every month, exactly the way Grandma used to save. Slow, consistent, thoughtful. She never had much, but she saved what she could. For us. Keyword. Us. Not him. Not one twin. Not the one Dad chose. I flipped to the next page. Then the next. My pulse sped up with every lowered balance, dates, amounts withdrawn, signatures. Then, my breath caught. A single withdrawal. All of it. Every dollar remaining. The entire account drained in one transaction. The signature at the bottom? Not mine, not Luke's, not Grandma's. It was my father's handwriting, sloppily mimicking mine. I covered my mouth, the room spinning violently. "Mom, he forged my name," her eyes filled with tears. "Yes." I confronted him when I discovered it. He said he was reallocating the money appropriately. He claimed you wouldn't put it to good use. I felt like I'd been physically punched. "He stole my future," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "My own father." Mom nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. And Luke never knew. I flipped to the back of the folder where a letter, Grandma's familiar, shaky handwriting, was tucked carefully behind the statements. My throat closed with emotion. Her cursive, shaky but still full of grace, read, "To my Hannah, if your father ever tries to tell you this account isn't yours, know that I saw you long before others learned how to. This is for both you and Luke equally. Do not let anyone make you small." The ink was smudged slightly on Hannah, like she pressed the pen too hard or her hand trembled while writing my name. A sob escaped my throat. I clutched the letter to my chest, feeling 7 years of buried wounds reopen all at once. Mom pulled me into her arms as I cried, my body shaking with the shock and grief. "He never had the right," she whispered into my hair. "Your grandmother trusted him to handle things fairly. He betrayed that trust. He betrayed you. Anger. Deep, burning anger pulsed through me. Not wild, but anchored, sharp, and painfully clear. He always said I wasn't good enough, I whispered, pulling back. And all this time, he was the one stealing from me. Mom nodded slowly. That's why I saved the folder. I knew you would need the truth someday. I wiped my face and stood up, clutching the documents in one hand. My voice was steady now, fueled by a new, cold resolve. I'm telling Luke. Mom didn't stop me. She didn't tell me to calm down. She didn't warn me about Dad. Because she knew this wasn't drama. This was justice. Luke was in the garage, shooting a foam basketball into an old hoop nailed above the tool shelf. He always came here when something weighed on him. Maybe he sensed something was wrong, or maybe he was wrestling with the guilt Dad's announcement had triggered. He turned when I walked in. Hannah, why do you... I handed him the first statement. He frowned. What is... Keep reading. He flipped the pages slowly at first, then faster. His eyes widened, his lips parted. When he reached the forged signature and the final transaction, he froze entirely, the color draining from his face. Hannah, he whispered, his voice hollow. Dad. Did this? I nodded, tears burning again, but this time out of anger, not despair. Luke looked sick. This was your future. Grandma worked so hard to save this. Why would he? Because he decided you were the worthy one, not me. Luke shook his head fiercely. No, that's not. That's exactly what he said today. He swallowed hard, guilt pulling his shoulders inward. I never wanted that. I never wanted him to choose me over you. I know. But this is different, he said, holding the papers with shaking hands. This is stealing, this is lying, this is... Favoritism doesn't stop at words, I said quietly. Sometimes it becomes a crime. Luke's breath hitched. I have to talk to him. No, I said. We talked to him together. He nodded once, the papers clutched in his grip. We stepped out of the garage, papers in Luke's hands, fury in my chest, and years of silence finally snapping. Dad was in the backyard grilling, humming to himself like nothing in the world was wrong. Dad! Luke called out, his voice sharp and commanding. Dad glanced over his shoulder. What? Luke held up the papers. Explain this. Dad's expression tightened instantly, jaw clenching, eyes darkening. Where did you get those? Hannah showed me. Dad scoffed and turned back to the grill, dismissing the papers. Old documents. You're misunderstanding. No, I said, stepping forward, my voice steady, powerful. You forged my name. You drained the account Grandma left for both of us. And you gave Luke the money. Dad didn't turn around. He simply flipped a burger with cold, deliberate precision. You wouldn't have known what to do with the money, he said, his tone flat. I made the right choice. The right choice? Luke repeated, stunned. You stole from her. You lied to us. Dad slammed the spatula onto the grill, the sound sharp and violent. Enough! He barked. I did what needed to be done. Luke has a future. You, he pointed the spatula at me, are still lost. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. And even if you weren't, he added cruelly, his voice low and cutting, you're not good enough to manage something that important. The words landed heavier than ever, because now they came with undeniable proof that he had acted on that deep-seated belief. That wasn't yours to decide, I whispered. He scoffed. Someone had to. But Grandma already decided, I said, holding up her letter. She chose us both, equally, and you spit on that. Dad's face went pale. For the first time, fear. Where did you get that? He demanded, looking suddenly panicked. Mom saved it, I said. His eyes widened slightly, panic flickering beneath the rage. She had no right. She had every right, Luke snapped, stepping in front of me. You covered this up. You stole this? And you expected us to thank you? Dad finally exploded. I am your father. I know what is best for this family. No, Luke said, standing his ground. You knew what was best for your ego. Dad took a step forward, anger radiating off him. But he wasn't looking at Luke. He was looking straight at me. You think you're a victim? He hissed. You think any of this changes the truth? You've never been good enough. Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't me breaking. It was the last thread of fear I'd ever had of him. I lifted my chin, meeting his furious gaze. No, Dad, you've never been good enough. Not as a father. Silence fell so heavy the backyard seemed to stop breathing. Dad's eyes widened, not in guilt, but in white-hot rage. But before he could speak, Mom stepped outside onto the patio. No more, she said quietly. And for the first time in my life, Dad shut up. Mom stood on the patio steps like she had been waiting for the exact moment the truth could no longer be contained. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even angry in the way Dad expected. She was resolute, calm, done. Michael, she said, her voice steady, stop talking. Dad turned to her, furious. You don't tell me. I just did. His jaw snapped shut. Mom walked toward us, her steps slow, deliberate, like each one was burying years of fear she no longer allowed to rule her. I am tired, she said softly, of watching you tear down your own daughter because she doesn't fit your definition of worthy. Dad scoffed. I tried to make smart choices for this family. No, she said, her voice slicing through the air. You made selfish choices, hurtful choices, and you hid behind the word family to justify your cruelty. He glared at her. I gave Luke the account because he earned it. No, Mom corrected, her voice rising in certainty. You gave Luke the account because you wanted a son who validated your ego, and Hannah didn't fit your narrative, so you tried to erase her. Hannah is dramatic, Dad said, resorting to his usual dismissals. She cries when things get hard. She can't handle pressure. That's because you broke her spirit, Mom shouted, emotion finally cracking through her calm. You spent years telling her she wasn't enough, and now you're surprised she doubts herself? You created that doubt. Dad's face twisted, but he didn't deny it. He couldn't. Luke stepped beside me, his jaw tight with righteous indignation. Dad, I'm done pretending this is okay. Dad stared at him, betrayed. You're choosing her over me? No, Luke said quietly, the weight of the moment heavy in his voice. I'm choosing what's right. You always told me to stand up for myself. I am. Just not in the way you expected. Dad stepped back slightly, stunned by the united front. Mom crossed her arms, her resolve unwavering. I met with a lawyer. Dad whipped around, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. You did what? You broke the law, Mom said calmly. You forged your daughter's signature. You stole funds intended for both children. That's a felony in our state. Dad's face drained of color completely. You wouldn't dare. I already have, she replied. Everything has been documented and filed, and if you don't leave this house tonight, I will press charges. Dad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time, he was powerless. Completely, utterly, painfully powerless. You can't do this, he managed to choke out. Mom shook her head. I already did. Dad's shoulders fell in defeat. Where am I supposed to go? Mom's voice softened, not with pity, but with finality. That's for you to figure out, not us. Dad looked at me next. I expected anger, denial, a last desperate attempt to blame me. But what I saw was something far more pathetic. A man confronting the one thing he had never planned for, the consequences of his own choices. Hannah, he said quietly, a ghost of his former authority. I didn't mean. He couldn't finish. The excuses died on his tongue because the truth was standing right in front of him, holding the proof. I hope someday you understand, he said, his voice pleading. I already do, I replied, my voice clear and firm. You chose him over me, and when you had the chance to fix it, You doubled down on the lie and the theft. Dad swallowed hard. Then, without another word, he turned, walked to the side gate, opened it, and disappeared down the street. It was the quietest exit he had ever made, leaving a silence in his wake that was not tense or broken, but simply breathing. Luke exhaled shakily. "Are you okay?" I nodded, even though tears stung my eyes, but they were different tears now, tears of relief, not despair. "Yeah, for the first time, I think I am." He pulled me into a hug, solid, protective, full of unspoken remorse and love. "I'll fix this," he whispered, referring to the money. "You didn't break it," I reminded him gently. He did. Mom joined us, resting a hand on my back. "My mother would be proud of you." I held the folder to my chest. "I hope so." "She always saw you," Mom said, her voice filled with newfound conviction, even when the rest of us didn't see clearly enough. Those words, they healed something inside me I didn't realize was still bleeding. 3 months later, life wasn't magically perfect, but it was fundamentally different. Better, calmer. The house felt brighter without Dad's shadow stretching over every doorway. Mom laughed more freely. Luke supported me in ways I never expected, driving me to classes, showing up to school events, standing up for me without prompting. And I applied for a financial aid program at the community college, using Grandma's letter as part of my personal statement. I was accepted. The first day of classes, I walked onto campus holding her letter in my backpack like a talisman, proof that someone believed in me long before the world learned my name. A few weeks later, I got a job at the rec center assisting kids with tutoring and organizing activities. The supervisor, a kind older woman, said, "You're patient and thoughtful. Kids need that." No one had ever said anything like that to me, recognizing my quiet qualities. I almost cried right there in the hallway. Luke showed up later that afternoon, leaning against the gym doors, smiling like I had just won a gold medal. "You're good with them," he said, his pride evident. "I'm proud of you." I smiled back, my heart full. Dad sent a message a few weeks after that, a long text apologizing, explaining, blaming stress, blaming circumstances, blaming everything except the truth. His own inadequacy as a parent. I didn't reply. Luke didn't either, and Mom blocked his number permanently. Some wounds don't heal because the other person changes. They heal because you do. One night, as I sat in bed reading, I pulled out Grandma's letter again. "Do not let anyone make you small." I traced the words with my fingertip. For the first time in my life, I believed them. Because I finally understood the core truth. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It was that my father wasn't good enough to see me. But I saw myself now, clearly, fully, honestly, and that was enough to build a future he never imagined I could have.